You see, the point that Bhagat makes that some intellectuals are not above board and possibly peddled the kind of narrative that some of these so-called militant organization is, I think, sometimes amusing to me because I have not heard a single Meitei intellectual who have called out the militant role of Arambam Tengol, Meitei Lipund, and for that matter, the culpability and complicity of the chief minister till today. And I think this is very, very unfortunate. Look at the chain of events that Bhagat just alluded to, Khamenlok, Aigezang, and Khopibung, which in effect was independently reported, not just by the local sources, but also by some of these more independent crowd source funded journalists. Look at Grishma Kuthar, for example, who has sent a very grounded series of, reports, what she titled it as Manipur Dispatch. For example, she report, for example, in the case of the burning down of Aigezang and Khamenglok, 3,500 mobs mobilized. Now, the kind of narrative that we get to hear from the Valley and from Valley area intellectuals, very unfortunately, is that they try to kind of target a particular community by somehow absolving the culpability of the state commando in mobilizing these massive mobs. Remember that you still have, Section 144 CRPC in place. Why is it that 3,500 odds of mobs could be mobilized on the back of police commando when 144 CRPC is in place? That's a hard fact that you cannot run away from. You have to address this issue. And all the
Janmanji.
so-called attacks are not from the Kuki militants. Let us categorically make it very clear. It's all offensive strike coming from the valley, mobilized, all this armed militant organization frontally led by the police commando. And unless this truth is confronted, a spade is called a spade. I do not see that the real picture that transpired on the ground can be well, analyzed in ways which is above board and objective. That's one point that we have to also take into account. Another important point that I have heard, not only from the MP, Rajkumar Ranjan Singh and Bhagat, is looks like they continue to kind of put a scapegoat on the role of the Sioux militants. Let us remember that these so-called Sioux militants had been discredited, in the run-up to all these tribal protests, despite the fact that the chief minister, who continued to be so misinformed and ill-informed about the ground realities, continued to castigate these Sioux militants. Remember that these same Sioux militants had been domesticated and they had been discredited. Their legitimacy is thoroughly exposed and questioned because they had been effectively co-opted by the state machinery over this year. And large part of this tribal mobilization, let me remind your audience, is also having to do with the kind of gaps, legitimacy gaps between state institutions and the so-called militant organization who seek to represent the Hill people. There's so much of distrust and lack of legitimacy, so much so that, this popular movement that you have seen today is nothing that has been experienced. It is unprecedented, such and popular mobilization to suggest that these villagers, the village guards who do not speak up, connive with the militants, I think is not squaring up with what actually transpired on the ground. I think people like Bhagat would really would like to broaden, the sources from which they, framed and articulate this type of narrative. I think that is precisely where you would see that despite the lockdown of internet and their systematic plan, by the police commando and the militant organization based from the valley, still today, to strike down some of these, mobile transmission centers, Airtel being one of the last casualty there, right, in these Suknu Zero areas. And because of this information blackout, there is a lot of falsehood and misrepresentation being spread around. Look at the experience of Afrida Hussein, for example, when she reported graphically about the involvement of so-called 500 surrendered militants. Remember that this is just a very conservative estimate. In fact, it is an open secret that all these armed militants which are now used Arambai Tengol, Meitei Lipund, and all these mobilized mobs are part of a larger institutionalized ecosystem which has been building up since 2001. Remember that when Indo-Naga ceasefire extension was sought to be extended without territorial limit, Biren Singh, as a political leader of the time, was one of the front-ranking political leader who took Suan to protect, the territorial integrity of the state. And this bogey about territorial integrity of the state, which now come back very forcefully, are now dictated by a coordination committee, which take different manifestation. And let us also put into context that some of these organizations, Arambal Tengol, Meitei Lupund, now the Kokomi Coordinating Committee on Protecting Manipur's Integrity, and even Meira Paibis, look at the article which appeared together with Bhagat article this morning, my colleague Hoiniling Silok, for example, look at the very compromised position and role of Meira Paibis as guardian of peace, because their position itself seems to be very compromised, and their target is not so much on the police commando who have wreaked so much of so-called fake encounter killings, and rather on the armed force. And look at some of the context in
Professor
which
Swan, can I stop you?
Trust, let me just finish this context, Kartik.
Sudhakar ji has been raising his hand for some time.
Because you see, let me finish this last 1 minute more. So this is the larger context in which, say, for example, when the BP's Even Ready Commission committee was instituted in 2004, gave its report in 2005. You look at the kind of memorandums that Valley-based or civil society organization-based in the hills presented to the BP's Even Ready Committee report, you'll find a dissonance of voice where the hill communities accept the Nagas because the Nagas are at the receiving end of Armed Force Special Powers Act. But still today, in the Kuki Zone areas, inhabited areas, you still find that Assam Rifles or the Central Armed groups are considered to be fairly objective and neutral, and they're considered to be savior of the hills. And there is a historical pedigree to this. And that is precisely why, because the kind of antecedents of the police commando who had been responsible, for example, allegedly, responsible in killing down 8 of the 9, tribal martyrs in 2015. You have this long-drawn, sense of trust or legitimacy built up, and it will be naive to kind of dismiss that these are parochial, very narrow-minded, very sectarian, ethnicity-based mobilization, which have important, bearings on the way we see and look at, some of these important state institutional structure. So I think we have to nuance that, and how does this play over time, and the complicity or the more objective role of the armed force has to be juxtaposed with the very compromised role that the police commando have executed over time.
I think it's time I allow General Saab to speak.
Thank you. I have understood your obligations and operating parameters. I'll keep my statement short. Wish you had given me a chance to complete my
no, please.
You
can take your time, General Saab. You can take your time. That's not an issue. कई बार हो जाता है. I don't treat it like a TV debate. You see, I'm, I don't put. There are no ads here, so there is no commercial obligation on me that I need to cut short people. It's just that I need to accommodate everyone. Please take your time. बोलिए.
Yeah. You see, I just want to link up with what I said. Getting peace and harmony at this juncture is a very, very hard thing to achieve. To achieve a hard thing, you have to apply hard options. What are the hard options? I have said seal the border first. Number 2, because why am I saying this, Kartika? More I study, more I do research, more I get convinced that it is the second Kashmir which is being created by inimical forces. It could be China's hand, it could be foreign conspiracy, global conspiracy at play. So it could be anything. I personally, as per my assessment, this violence is going to continue even longer than what it has taken place 9 years back. So my assessment, it could be 20 years, 30 years, unless we nip the bud well in time. So therefore, it brings me, how do we achieve peace and harmony at this juncture? To me, it appears that not enough is being done. So what is required to be done? Firstly, you isolate the critical areas. What is the meaning of isolation? Isolation means the affected party or the stakeholders who are the victims. they need to be identified correctly. They need to be shifted out of the present place of residence, brought to safe and secure settlement areas, those areas have to be kept under protection parties. Their supply chain survival kit has to be ensured that they are sustainable for the livelihood, and they have to be prepared for a long haul. The children have to be, the schooling has to be arranged, their healthcare has to be arranged, entertainment has to be arranged, games and sports, some kind of a creative modern life system has to be catered for. One. Number two, alongside what needs to be done is a military combing operation. Let me share with you, since it is a very unique kind of a debate you are holding, and I don't see any other channel giving so much of focus without any interruptions. I must compliment you and your team. Let me say that the military component today, when I say military component, it excludes the paramilitary forces. The Assam Rifle, the CRPF, the BSF, the Manipur Rifles, the India Reserve Battalion. Today, as things stand, the content and the density of army, regular army I'm talking of, in the same area is lesser, much lesser than what it used to be earlier. The Armed Forces Special Power Act having been removed, more say and more expectations will be always there from the police force who are operating. Therefore, what I'm coming to is, when you have combing operation, military combing operation, unless it is done in a precise manner based on surgical intelligence, so it will be basing, the operations will be planned on specific surgical information purely to disarm the people, get all this 3,000 balance of weapon system. And mind you, that the border has been sealed, we take it that no weapons are coming into Manipur. Third and most important point is, narcotics is playing a lot of havoc as my study and research. We need to take stock of the narcotics. And in this combing operation, it should be ensured that the military or the joint forces, they do not go in for jungle bashing. Jungle bashing will further alienate people. It will also cause or result in enhancing the trust deficit. Our aim is to reduce the trust deficit, bring it to the normal, acceptable level, and thereafter we talk of peace and harmony. Alongside what needs to be done is that it is very, very important that the peace effort and the investigation which is going on today, in my opinion, until unless the intensity of the violence is brought down to an acceptable level, these investigations should be put on hold for the time being, temporarily, maybe 10 days, maybe 30 odd days, maybe 2 months or 3 months. And alongside the peacemaking effort, also it will be futile unless there is a close participation and willing acceptance of the group. The group being a huge, humongous one, 50, 60 people, I think we need to be very, very calibrated, need to put our finger on those people who make a substantive, there is a high degree of acceptability of these leaders, and they should be representative of all the affected parties and the stakeholders. So therefore, it brings me to the sum total of all these efforts is that there are 5 or 6 components which need to be addressed. Number one, the military component is the combing operation. We need to withdraw all these weapons, recover them, put them back into the armory. Number two, the affected parties or the groups or the communities have to be put into the settlement, safe, secure settlement area. These settlement areas have to be provided with a long-term logistic plan of supply chain, sustainable supply chain. The children they have to be put into some kind of academic curriculum, some kind of a creative and innovative curriculum, because to me, to my understanding, it is not going to finish off in 15 days or 1 month or 2 months or 6 months. It is going to last beyond 1 year. My assessment has never come so accurate. And let me tell you, the Minister of External Affairs has to engage with the military junta in Myanmar and tell them the red lines. These are our red lines. Please stop attacking this Maitai and the Kuki communities, because there is a migration taking place. Take control. Sooner we get the democracy back into Myanmar, I think it will play up in favor of Manipur. And last but not the least, thank you, Kartike. The point which I am saying is media has a role to play. Number one. Number two, the peacemakers have a role to play. The medical agencies, the employment opportunities, the development factor which the government of India has undertaken, all these aspects have to be looked at in a bipartisan manner. There has to be no parochial kind of leanings to anyone. And one last point is that there is a constitutional obligation which needs to be looked into. As far as I am concerned, if complete Nagaland has been given the status of the tribal status in the national schedule of tribes, why can't the Manipur, all the tribes be given the similar kind of status? I know it is a controversial statement, but as an independent panelist, I feel that this is a food for thought which the nation has to think of and find a solution so that both the communities, they live in harmony and peace for times to come. Back to you, Karthikeyan.